Air France Flight 007, a charter flight carrying the elite of Atlanta, Georgia's arts community, crashed on June 3, 1962 while attempting to depart Paris's Orly airport. The 707 carried 122 passengers and 10 crew and only 2 survived. The crash was at the time the worst single aircraft disaster, the first single civilian jet airliner disaster with more than 100 deaths, and the second deadliest aviation disaster in history. Accident. According to witnesses, during the takeoff roll on runway 8, the nose of Flight 007 lifted off the runway, but the main landing gear remained on the ground, even though the aircraft had already exceeded the maximum speed at which the takeoff could be safely aborted within the remaining runway length. The flight crew had no other choice and attempted to abort the takeoff. With less than 3,000 feet of runway remaining, the pilots used wheel brakes and reverse thrust to attempt to stop the 707. They braked so hard they destroyed the main landing gear, tires and wheels, but the aircraft ran off the end of the runway. The left undercarriage failed and a fire broke out. 3 flight attendants initially survived the disaster. 2 attendants seated in the back of the cabin survived, but the third died in the hospital. At the time, it was the world's worst air disaster involving 1 aircraft. Later investigation found that a motor driving the elevator trim had failed, leaving pilot Captain Roland Hoche and First Officer Jacques Pitoisset unable to complete rotation and liftoff. Impact on Atlanta, Georgia. The Atlanta Art Association had sponsored a month-long tour of the art treasures of Europe, and 106 of the passengers were art patrons heading home to Atlanta on this charter flight. The tour group included many of Atlanta's cultural and civic leaders. Atlanta Mayor Ivan Allen Jr. went to Orly to inspect the crash site where so many Atlantans perished. During the visit to Paris, the Atlanta arts patrons had seen Whistler's mother at the Louvre. In late 1962, the Louvre, as a gesture of goodwill to the people of Atlanta, sent Whistler's mother to Atlanta to be exhibited at the Atlanta Art Association Museum on Peachtree Street. The Woodruff Arts Center, originally called the Memorial Arts Center and one of the United States' largest, was founded in 1968 in memory of those who died in the crash. The loss to the city was a catalyst for the arts in Atlanta, helped create this memorial to the victims, and led to the creation of the Atlanta Arts Alliance. The French government donated a Rodin sculpture, The Shade, to the High Museum of Art in memory of the victims of the crash. And Uri Abrams, the author of Explosion at Orly, the true account of the disaster that transformed Atlanta, described the incident as Atlanta's version of September 11, in that the impact on the city in 1962 was comparable to New York of September 11. The crash occurred during the civil rights movement in the United States. Civil rights leader Martin Luther King, Jr., and entertainer and activist Harry Belafonte announced cancellation of a sit-in in downtown Atlanta as a conciliatory gesture to the grieving city. However, Nation of Islam leader Malcolm X, speaking in Los Angeles, expressed joy over the deaths of the all-white group from Atlanta, saying, "I would like to announce a very beautiful thing that has happened. I got a wire from God today. Well, alright, somebody came and told me that he really had answered our prayers over in France. He dropped an airplane out of the sky with over 120 white people on it because the Muslims believe in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But thanks to God, or Jehovah, or Allah, we will continue to pray, and we hope that every day another plane falls out of the sky." These remarks led Los Angeles Mayor Sam Yorty to denounce him as a fiend, and Dr. King to voice disagreement with his statement. Malcolm later remarked that the messenger should have done more. Quote, "This incident was the first in which Malcolm X gained widespread national attention. Malcolm later explained what he meant. When the plane crashed in France with the 130 white people on it, and we learned that 120 of them were from the state of Georgia, the state where my own father was a slave in, well, to me it couldn't have been anything but an act of God, a blessing from God. In art and popular culture, Andy Warhol painted his first disaster painting, 129 Die in Jet, based on the June 4, 1962 cover of New York Daily Mirror, the day after the crash. At the time, the death count was 129, and Uri Abrams wrote a biography of the passengers entitled Explosion at Orly, published in 2002. It detailed the lives of the passengers prior to the trip to Paris and the effect the disaster had on Atlanta. Flight number. Air France continues to use the flight number 7 today. However, the flight number is used on the trip back to France, and the flight now only runs from New York City's John F. Kennedy International Airport to Paris's Charles de Gaulle Airport, using an Airbus A380-800. The forward trip is now Flight 6, terminating in New York.